I'm Sarah, and I'm 30. I have a 10-year-old son, Jake, from my first marriage. I'm married again now, to John. He's 38, and we have a baby girl together, Lily, who's 1. We live in a quiet, little town. I met John about 6 years ago, when I was 24. He was 32. It's kind of a funny story, actually. We connected through a dating app. I liked his profile right away. We chatted online for weeks, and then finally met for coffee. We hit it off instantly. John had never been married before, and didn't have any kids. My first marriage hadn't worked out, but John made me happy. He was kind and funny, and he seemed genuinely interested in me and Jake. John was always pretty open with me about his past. He told me about a long-term girlfriend he'd lived with for 4 years. He'd broken up with her, said they just weren't right for each other. He also talked about this girl he was head over heels for when he was really young, like 16 or 17. She was his first love. He was drafted into the army right out of high school, and she didn't wait for him. He said it broke his heart. His mom even mentioned once that John had never quite gotten over her. Honestly, I was a little curious about this first love. I didn't press John, though. I didn't want to dwell on the past. I wanted to build a future with him. One time, John invited me to his apartment before we got married. I brought Jake along. I have to admit, I was a little surprised when I saw it. It was a bachelor pad. Old furniture, kind of run down, definitely needed some TLC. Why is your place like this? I asked him, a little bluntly. Don't you ever fix things up? He just shrugged and said he'd lived with his parents for so long, he never really got around to it. Later, I heard from his mom that he used to spend a lot of time with his buddies, drinking beer, and just hanging out. She also hinted that he used to bring different women over. None of this was a big deal, really. I noticed something else, too. He kept a small, worn-out card. It was from his first girlfriend, the one from high school. It was a going-away card from when he left for the army. He kept it as a sort of memory. Then, one New Year's Eve, John and I went downtown to see the lights. It was crowded, festive, and just as we were walking, John stopped dead in his tracks. He suddenly walked away from me, and Jake just stood by himself, staring at someone across the street. I followed his gaze and saw a woman. She was with her husband, laughing, and for some reason, she looked familiar. Then, it hit me. John had shown me a picture of her once. It was his first love. He just stood there watching her with this sad look on his face. I felt really strange. Why was he doing that? Why was he so fixated on her? He was completely silent for a few minutes. I started to wonder if he still had feelings for her. Maybe he still cared for her more than he cared for me. I tried to brush it off, but the thought lingered. Later, I brought it up. Do you still love her, John? Do you ever think about her? He got defensive. You're imagining things, he snapped. Don't be ridiculous. But he kept mentioning her sometimes, asking about her. I found out he'd even talked to her brother, casually asking how she was doing, what she was up to. It was like he couldn't let her go. His mom kept bringing her up, too, saying how much he loved her. It made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I was just a placeholder. It made me feel lonely. John became distant after that night. He wasn't as affectionate. He seemed lost in his own thoughts. I worried that he was thinking about her. I tried talking to him again. John, are you still in love with her? He just rolled his eyes and said, "You're doing it again. Stop imagining things." I didn't know what to believe. I loved him, but it felt like he was still living in the past. Maybe he would never truly be over her. Maybe he would never love me the way he loved her. I couldn't live like that. I didn't want to always feel like second best. I didn't want to feel like I wasn't enough. After a lot of soul searching, I made a decision. I confronted John one last time. "Do you want to stay with me, John, or do you want to go back to her? Because I can't do this anymore." He looked shocked. "What are you talking about? I love you. But his words rang hollow. I didn't feel loved. I didn't feel important. I knew I had to make a change for myself and for my kids. I told John I was leaving. I told him I needed to be with someone who loved me fully, someone who was present and invested in our family. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was the right thing. I couldn't live in the shadow of his first love. I deserved to be with someone who chose me every single day.